Most small business owners only think about insurance after something gets wrong. Don't be that person. With Next Insurance, you get fast, affordable coverage in minutes. No calls, no waiting, and no nonsense. Protect your business today at nextinsurance.com. Welcome to this Negotiation Masterclass edition of Negotiate Anything. With over 1,600 episodes featuring some of the world's brightest minds, we've carefully curated 3 powerful conversations for you. What makes this so special is that you'll hear how different experts from different industries approach the same challenge in their own unique ways. Our goal is to give you multiple perspectives so you can build your own unique style. Success doesn't look the same for everyone, and in this masterclass, you will see exactly why. Let's dive in. Joe, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I've waited because I know you stalk me online, so I've waited a long time for this. And this is going to be fun.
Agreed. So let's start off by telling the listeners a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, thank you. So for 25 years, I worked for the FBI, mostly working counterintelligence. So I was a spy catcher. And then 15 of those years I spent in this very small unit, this elite unit within the FBI called the Behavioral Program. And that was created to take a look at spies and see how we can get into their heads and recruit them and negotiate with them. And after I retired from the FBI, I started writing books and never intended for that to happen. And now 14 books later, I'm here with you, buddy. I'm here with you.
I love it. And everybody, I have to say, my favorite book from Joe is the What Everybody is Thinking. And I know the listeners who have been listening for a while, they say, yes, Kwame, we know you talk about it all the time. And I was just talking to Joe and saying, I was reviewing my notes recently on the book, and it's 24 pages of notes, size 11 font and single space. So
wow.
Highly recommend checking out anything that is published by this man. And you have a new book coming out too. So can you tell us about that too?
Yeah, thanks. So, over the years, people kept asking me, you write about human behavior, you write about body language and nonverbal communications. Why don't you write something that brings it all together? And so I did. So I took a year and a half off to write the book, Be Exceptional, which comes out June 29th, is the encapsulation of about 35 years of study of what really sets individuals apart. And obviously that is their behavior, how they do things. And so it's a good way to take a look at the science that's out there and the artistry of how we can differentiate ourselves, how we can take control of ourselves and use the strategies but in particular, the behaviors that truly exceptional people all share. And that's something that I've been studying for a long time. So I'm excited for the book to come out.
Absolutely. Me too. And I think something you'll see for the listeners, I'm going to constantly pull this back to negotiation.
Mm-hmm.
But what's going to happen is that you're going to see the commonalities of what it takes to be exceptional in whatever realm you happen to be in. And I think that's what's so exciting about this approach.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, because, I think someone said that if you're human, you're negotiating all the time, and I think you're right. I think that no day goes by that we are not parsing something in some way, trying to gain, or not necessarily an advantage, but to work something out. And so much of that has to do with communication. So much of that has to do, we forget good manners is a nonverbal, that talking to someone with kindness is a nonverbal. It's, it's not the words, it's the manner. And so I think a lot of negotiation that we do day in, day out. And, shall I tell them that story?
Yes, please do.
All right. So I can't say the country, but, people ask me all the time, well, you're teaching, you come out and you teach negotiations and so forth, and your approach is a little different. And I said, it's no different than what you do every day. Only the stakes are a little different. So one of the things that I was tasked to do when I was in the FBI, which was to target individuals who were intelligence officers for other countries who were operating here, what the public calls spies, and to try and recruit them so that they would come and work for us. And so a lot of times, I would run into these individuals here and there and sort of make myself known and so forth, but never really approached them directly, because sometimes they were being followed, or they themselves might take some action against me. So sometimes we would try and pick out where would be a great place to run into these individuals. And sometimes it was in what we call denied areas of the world. And those were areas where you knew that if the minute you land, you may be under surveillance and so forth. So we would find places to, run into these individuals. Now, you and I have talked about negotiations and planning and everything, that the preparation and so forth. But sometimes, in one case, I only had 7 minutes. I had 7 minutes between the moment that this individual's plane landed in a country I won't say, and his connecting flight. And so I had to figure out, through observation, which is what really a lot of the book is about, is what are his tendencies? How does he walk? Would it be best to just confront him directly, by approaching him from the front, or, as I finally did, by walking up beside him and sort of looking over at him and smiling? And he had this look of surprise, but it's like, I can't even believe you're here, dude. It's like, just keep walking, don't say any word. And meanwhile, I'm just walking like I'm another passenger, and therein begins the negotiations. It was one of these things where I didn't have to say who I was. He knew at that moment, finally, who I was, and, convince him, negotiate that I want to meet with you if you will but tell me, where that might be possible. And the fact that he walked alongside of me, the fact that we never changed the pace, that he didn't confront me or anything. And sure enough, the next time we had that opportunity, he did it in a rather clear way. He knew I was nearby, and rather than take the gum that he was chewing and throwing it in the garbage can, he took the gum and he wrapped it around a piece of paper and he laid it on the edge of the garbage bin, and that set the meeting for the eventual cooperation with me. And I look back at that, and I think of the companies that I've helped with in negotiations, and the planning, the articulation, the craftsmanship of, well, who's going to approach? Who will enter the room first? Who will be speaking? When the lead negotiator is speaking, what is everybody else doing? Because, are you just sitting there? Are you going to use your hands to gesture? Are you going to nod in agreement? Or are you going to sit directly in front of the other person in a stare contest, which I don't recommend? And so a lot of similarities. Obviously, we're dealing with nation state actors, but the craftsmanship that you use is the same. Yeah.
This is fantastic. And again, this what you've done is you've taken what we know about psychology, human interaction, and persuasion, and you've taken it to the next level by understanding human behavior in a way that puts you in a position where you can accomplish your goal, whatever the goal happens to be in that situation. And that's why it's so transferable, because you're using these skills in the highest of stakes interactions, counterintelligence, spies,
Mm,
double agents, and those type of things. But the
right.
same psychology applies at the boardroom as well in these business negotiations.
Yeah, the same psychology. Keep in mind, a lot of times in negotiations, you're dealing with corporations and they have their own sort of mentality or history. But then you have the history, or what I call the luggage of individuals. I was in negotiations down in Broward County where these folks, the county and another entity, are in every 3 years they're in negotiations, and they have so much luggage. And this is where unpacking that and understanding that we have to deal with that emotional luggage, and we have to park it. That the concept of, put the ego aside, well, that's all said and good, but it's not that easy. That you have to understand the personalities and then how to best approach each other. And sometimes having the right person make the right presentation is going to be the surest winner, rather than having somebody else doing it. So there's a lot that goes into it. Obviously, the more important the negotiation, the higher the stakes, the more effort that you can put into it.
Absolutely. And Joe, in your opinion, what
Mhm.
are some of the biggest psychological mistakes that people make during negotiation?
Oh, I love that question. Thank you. I think the biggest mistake is thinking that little things don't matter. Oh, if I could, if I could, say hello, McFly, these every little thing is important. From the moment you walk in, how you set up the meeting, how you greet the staff, saying hello to the security guards, the receptionists, everything else, being attentive to others in the smallest of ways, being polite, shaking hands, being mindful not to elevate emotions. Something so simple, you and I were talking recently about that. We can increase face time with each other if we but would just angle each other a little bit, because to look at each other straight on is in effect very antagonizing. And the minute that we can just sort of, even if it's just rotating a little in the chair, we can just soften the mood. um, Turn yielding, making it an art form that, I'm going to let you speak, and I'm going to let you speak fully and completely. And then hopefully you will yield, and then it'll be my turn. And these little things that, I mean, I can tell you all the horror stories of people in negotiation, and somebody's, working their phone, or somebody's picking their ear, and you say, no, I can't believe I'm seeing this. And that's because nobody has told them that everything in the theater of negotiations matters. Everything. And from facial reactions, right? So we often talk about facial reactions, and somebody will throw out a number, and immediately you'll see the wrinkled nose and the shaking head, and right away now you've got to deal not just with the possibility of a no, but you're dealing with someone who is demonstrating this, which makes it even more difficult, because now you have to overcome this display and so forth. So it's that, I would say it's that recognition that the small things don't matter. I think most people in negotiations work the facts and but I know in the FBI, we would literally rehearse how we would walk in, who would walk in first, where we would sit, who looks at whom, how are things transacted, who will say what words, all because, in the theater of the interview or the theater of negotiations, it's the small things that really matter. Yeah.
You're absolutely right. And I think that's one of the most interesting things about what you bring to the table with your expertise too, really hammering home that reality. And I think about one of the classic sayings from chess is every move has a purpose. You don't just make moves for the sake of moving the pieces. There's always a reason behind it.
Absolutely. For instance, when do we call recess? When do we ask for a break? When do we stop sitting down? I remembered I was giving a lecture at up north at a really prestigious university, and they were shocked when I said, "Well, why don't we just get up from the chair?" And it's like what? Yeah. Why do we have to remain sitting? Just get up from the chair, put the chair in front of you. You still got the conference room there, and decide that you want to stand and talk about what you're passionate about. Why are you talking passionately about something sitting down? And it's how we orchestrate that, the use of the hands to explain, to envelop, to demark that we're talking about one thing and that we have studied it carefully, dynamically, and that we have made a decision of how we're going to proceed. Just those gestures potentiate the message. Can you imagine if I had just said that with my hands on my lap? It would lose its meaning. And yet we know that when you use gestures and you combine it with, for instance, a certain cadence of speech, that people just can't stop but listening to you. And that's a great way to reveal your commitment to what you're saying.
So everybody, now you have a reason to follow our YouTube page so you can see Joe explaining with these gestures, because this is going to, maybe it doesn't sound silly, maybe this is the point, but it was almost hypnotic, right? I was so almost invested in what it is that you were saying. It certainly did have a much greater impact when you started to focus on the way that you were gesticulating.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that I found with exceptional speakers was their use of their hands. I look at Colin Powell, who is really one of the great speakers out there. He's a great thinker, a thought leader, and obviously a great general and secretary of state. And you look at how he used gestures to really powerfully message. And, throughout history, we have seen great examples of that. And I find too many executives know the numbers, but don't know how to communicate that information powerfully. The fact that I can tell you that, look, this is our best offer, right? So now you're up against a wall, and my thumbs are in a gravity-defying position. This is it. There's no more movement here. I am not vacillating. I'm not in any way going to change my mind. That's it. That puts an end to the back and forth. You've reached that point where, say, guys, ladies and gentlemen, this is it. This is it. And that message of visual as well as vocal becomes much more powerful, and they have to react to it.
And it makes so much sense, because when you think about everything as communication, we have our voice as communication.
Right.
Our demeanor as communication, our tone, our intonation, our body language, what we're wearing, all of those things are communicating a message.
Absolutely. The clothing that we wear, the like you said, the gestures, something so simple as, how I reach for something, right? So the person that's jittery versus the person that reaches for it smoothly. The higher we are, the more competent and confident we are in an organization, the smoother our gestures. The lower we are, the more tentative we are, the more jittery the gesture. So we would literally rehearse. All right, so now we've been at this for 2.5 hours. I'm going to reach for that glass of water and it's going to be smooth. And I'm going to drink it. Think of how many people have been criticized because they've been seen on the media where they go to grab water and it's shaking. And, I'm not going to name names, but I mean, I've seen Silicon Valley people, I've seen, heads of state doing this, not realizing that behavior is unsettling. And as I said, in the theater of negotiation, everything matters. Everything matters.
What I started thinking, Joe, is I'm thinking about humans as animals. And I think it becomes more interesting, even more interesting, if you think about us like animals. So we would watch Animal Planet, National Geographic, those type of things, and we're looking at the mannerisms of the animals, and this means that, this means this. This is a dominance display. And then if you think about us as animals, we are animals biologically speaking, and so we're going to be responding to the same cues that the animals out in the jungle would be as well.
On point. We are just another species. We are primates, right? And we respond to the alphas. We respond to the hierarchy displays. This is why we dress up. This is why instead of having a big pen in our pockets, we have the Mont Blanc or whatever, because we're sensitive to these things. But we're also sensitive to the gestures that come with higher status. So, the higher status individual can engage in more eye contact. I have seen negotiators walk into a room and they're so daunted by it all that all they do is look straight ahead and never looking around, not realizing that they're limiting their ability to project confidence because they don't take the moment to look around and look at everybody present. And in essence, as we learned in law enforcement, I'm not scared of this room. I am confident in myself. And so just eye gaze behavior, the turn yielding that I spoke of, even for instance, instead of saying, no, Kwame, go ahead, saying, Kwame, go ahead. Let's hear what you have to say. Whoa, I am now taking charge without you knowing that I'm taking charge by doing these gestures that are consistent with turn yielding. And yet all of a sudden I'm the invited guest. And now I am, capitalizing on those powerful behaviors. We are, as you said, we are just another species, and we are sensitive to the smallest of things. Yeah.
As a lawyer, this is something I saw in my clients all the time. You know what it is that most small businesses don't plan for? It's when something goes wrong. You lose a client, a shipment disappears, a tool breaks, someone gets hurt, and money flies out the door, and most folks only realize that they needed insurance after it's too late. And that's why I like Next Insurance. They make business insurance as simple as ordering lunch online. All you need to do is answer a few quick questions, and then Next figures out the right coverage, and you're covered in minutes. No phone calls, no waiting, no nonsense. Fast, affordable protection that's built for small business owners. Contractors, consultants, retail, restaurants, even if it's just you and your laptop at home. Do you need proof of insurance for a job? You get an instant certificate of insurance so you don't have to wait to start the job or close the deal. And when things do go sideways, claims are resolved fast, on average in about 15 days, with some paid in just 24 hours, so you can get back to work. End the year with peace of mind and head into 2026 protected. Policies start at $29 a month. Get covered in minutes at nextinsurance.com. That's NEXT insurance.com. This is brilliant. And so one of the questions that I've gotten before when I was doing trainings, a young woman said, well, I'm a lawyer. And I'm in these difficult conversations, these negotiations all the time.
Right.
And I'm usually the youngest in the room, one of the few women in the room, and I am 5 feet tall. And so I'm significantly smaller, physically smaller than the other people in the room. And like you said, Joe, everything has an impact. And so people are going to perceive that size difference. So what can somebody who is smaller do to make it so that the discrepancy in size doesn't create some kind of power dynamic that doesn't work for them?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. This is one that I'm often asked, and one of the greatest example that I have is Mary Erdos, who is with J.P. Morgan. When you listen to Mary Erdos, you think she's 6'5". Well, she's probably only about 5'3", 5'4". But it's how she carries herself. And so what I tell people is, yes, there is a height dividend, just as there's a beauty dividend, but we can compensate. And the first thing we can do is compensate by walking in with that presence where nothing and no one is off limits for you to look at, that you talk with confidence, but with a lowered voice. Right. So this is, in the military, I know the Marines do this. They send you out into the field and they say, find your Marine voice and your that gravelly sort of voice. And we had, and in law enforcement, I had to learn that lower voice, because when we're nervous, I don't want people to hear me say, stop, you're under arrest, right? That's not going to turn out well for anybody. But you learn to, when you are under stress, that you're going to lower the voice and you say, stop right there. Do not move. And this is one of the things that I coach often, is working on that voice that, obviously you're not going to, sound, as deep as maybe a man's, but lowering the voice, people will listen. Speaking, especially for women, speaking in cadence. In other words, saying, I have a proposal. And that proposal is that we take into account everything that we've talked about thus far today, but also take into account everything from yesterday. The fact that you can talk in cadence means you're owning it. This is temporal. This is temporal dominance. It's like, I'm not going to hurry for you. I'm not going to go blah, 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 just for you. There's going to be temporal dominance, and I'm going to own this minute. How you sit, a lot of women tend to steeple and do hand gestures very low, elevating those. And then making sure that nothing is said without there being some gestures. And what will happen is you will be perceived. If we then, and we've done this, if we then went throughout the room and said, how tall do you think she is? They're going to put 5 inches on you, because it's a matter of perceptions. It's a matter of how you are perceived. And one last thing, and that is increase the vocabulary. Make sure that you have a more not a dominant vocabulary, but a more robust vocabulary. Because one of the things that happens, our species, we humans, respond to whoever has that better vocabulary. And we will always be that way. And whether we're listening to a beautiful poet, whether we're listening to Churchill, the eloquence, the sheer beauty of Martin Luther King, it's that command of words immediately elevates you. And as Wittgenstein said, the limits of my language are the limits of my world. And so you are self-limiting if you have a limited vocabulary. So increasing the vocabulary so that you project that. That's pretty much what I teach. That we can change. We can change the perceptions. And as you know, Kwame, a lot of this stuff, it's not about spending money on doing anything. It's about changing the behaviors. It's about changing what we do in that theater of the interview. You're up against somebody that's just being hard-headed and so forth. Why are we still sitting here if this ball is not moving in any direction? Stand up, move around the room. Change the dynamic to see if that helps to move the ball along.
I love this. And Joe, I have to let you know, you are the first person to quote Ludwig Wittgenstein on the podcast. So I appreciate that. One of my favorite quote from Wittgenstein is, if a lion could speak, you couldn't understand him. And it makes me think about some of the cultural differences that people can have in these difficult conversations, and then what we could possibly do to overcome that and create connection in spite of those differences.
Very different when it comes to culture. And in America, we have cultures within cultures within cultures. You can go from Manhattan to Brooklyn and have, they're using different words, different concepts. You go to the Midwest and the West and so forth. I think this is, and I appreciate this because this is one of the things that's covered in the book, is that we have to listen to the words that are used, that we have to understand those words, that if I, Joe Navarro, who's now almost 70, for me, I grew up using the word, it's a problem. Now people say, well, it's an issue. No, it's a problem. And the fact that you are not receptive to my concept of this, we have to take each other into account and say, where's this, I have negotiated with people in France, in Romania, in the Middle East, in Latin America, and so forth. And we have to have that understanding. And the best thing I have found is, can you explain to me what you mean by this? Because I really want to understand where you're coming from. And I love to front my ignorance. I won't hesitate to let you know how clever I can be, but I don't mind fronting my ignorance and saying, gosh, I've never heard of that. What do you mean? Oh, I see. So, and then what happens is when we get others to explain to us things, they're becoming our cooperators. You're in essence getting them to cooperate with you. It's kind of like, as I know like Benjamin Franklin asking his enemies to do him a favor.
Yes.
And then they became best friends. And there's something about the psychology of it where I don't mind saying, when you talk about equities, what do you mean? What do you mean by equities? Is it just what you own, or the get them to explain things? And I think, yeah, we do. Well, I think we have two responsibilities. One is to really understand what the other person is saying. When they say, I hate this, let's unpack that. And the second one is that we have to come across at times as very neutral, so that we are perceived as someone who is at least reasonable and not obdurate and not contentious. So that's one of our responsibilities also.
This is great. This is really great. And one of the things, I want to take this all the way back to the beginning. This was something that you said about the book, where be exceptional. And you're trying to figure out what sets people apart. And you settled on, of all of the things under the sun, you settled on behaviors.
Powerful behaviors that, in studying individuals over 4 decades, because I was in this behavioral program in the FBI, that it all came down to behaviors. These individuals had mastery over their own behaviors. They weren't allowing things to get to them. They weren't blowing up and throwing a fit and so forth. Their behaviors were within that realm that others could respect. That doesn't mean they don't have a bad day, but that means that overwhelmingly they had mastery over themselves, that they were able to create an apprenticeship program. No matter how much adversity they faced, they created their own apprenticeship program, whether it was going to the library and reading books or calling people up and talking to them. But they created, people talk about, find your bliss. Well, when Joseph Campbell, the great mythologist, talked about in The Power of Myth, when he talked about finding your bliss, he wasn't saying like sit in a chair and it's going to come to you. He was talking about creating an apprenticeship where you could achieve that. And that takes all the behaviors, focus, dedication, the will and so forth. And then the other behaviors had to do with this other area, which is, in negotiations, you're doing this the whole time, which is observing what are the needs, wants, and desires, but also what are their preferences. Right? You have a negotiations, and all of a sudden you show up, with donuts and coffee, and they only drink diet foods and tea. I've seen people just roll their eyes like, I'm on a diet, buddy. I don't want to eat this. I mean, they literally look at you like, is this it? So, and can we observe concerns and fears? I was just interviewed yesterday for a magazine article, and they said, now that we're coming back to a lot of us are coming back to work. I said, watch out. This concept of being able to perceive our preferences, you're going to have people that are going to be uncomfortable standing too close. You're going to have people that are going to be uncomfortable shaking hands too soon. You're going to have people uncomfortable because, somebody's wearing a mask and somebody isn't. And we have to take responsibility for that and say, look, if success is measured by our ability to communicate with each other, we've got to create an environment where we have an appreciation for preferences. Because frankly, I don't want somebody standing too close to me. Not right now. And we have to be able to perceive that. And that requires observations. And then the one thing that no negotiator will tell you is what they fear. And yet that's in counterintelligence, that's always what we were looking for. What does this person fear? And when you can identify what that fear is, then you can appreciate somebody's final price point. You can appreciate somebody's decision schema and so forth. And, you know, the other part of what exceptional people had was this ability to communicate. And it, you know, they didn't have to be Churchill and they didn't have to be Lincoln. It was just, you know, do they have the ability to comfort and put an arm around you and show you love? There's a crossing guard not 3 blocks from here. And every day those kids go by and give this lady a hug. You're telling me that isn't more powerful than words? Those kids live for that. And so we have to realize that words can only do so much, that we as a species for at least 300 or 400,000 years, you know, communicated non-verbally. We had to communicate silently because we were surrounded by predators. And so we had to move through the savannas, through the jungles quietly, but we had to do it effectively. And that's why nonverbals still dominate. That's why they are so important even in this day and age. And then, of course, exceptional people, they act immediately, but also pro-socially. And you don't realize the effect of that is. But imagine you go to a business and you got to go through security. Then you got to go through receptionist. Then you go through the personal assistant. And finally, you get into the individual's office you want to see. You want to change things around? Meet the person that's important to you at the curbside. If you're a negotiator and you're waiting for them to arrive, right? What message are you setting? I meet them at the curbside, and now we're putting coins in that bank that says, you know what? We have an opposite take. We have we have responsibilities that may not come together, but I value you. And that's why I'm waiting out here, waiting for you. And that changes the negotiations. What are they going to talk about the break? God, that Joe Navarro, he was waiting for us down here. That's really nice. Nobody else does that. These small things, you know, believe me, in counterintelligence, we use these techniques all the time because you've got no other leverage than to use these little powerful things that your grandmother or maybe a grandfather, you know, threw a ball at you or gave you a piece of candy. And that created this next area, which is the final area of the book, which is the power of creating psychological comfort. And when you have psychological comfort, you can achieve anything because humans gravitate towards psychological comfort, and whoever provides that is going to win. They're going to win because our species dislikes the noise, dislikes the animosity, dislikes the tension, and so we gravitate towards that person that provides it, whether or not we realize it or not. We like that in others and those that provide it. And that's what exceptional people taught me, that it's not about how much you earn or anything like that. It's about how you treat others.
Joe, this is fantastic. I like I told you before, I've already pre-ordered the book, and I'm so excited for this. And so before you go, when we think about the people in the audience, they're having these difficult conversations with their friends, their colleagues, their family members.
Right.
They're negotiating high stakes deal. What is one thing that you would suggest that they do to start becoming exceptional at their craft?
there's thousands of things that I could say, but if there's one powerful thing in it, and it's the simple nonverbal, is just simply sit next to them, tilt your head, cant your head slightly, which communicates, I may have an agenda, but I'm being receptive to you, and query. Do a benign query. Tell me about what you're thinking. What drove you to this? What is behind this? Try to understand without imposing what you have to say. One of the things that I learned in dealing with other nation state actors is that they had reason to hate us. They had reason to not cooperate with us. But when I gave them the opportunity to vent or to let me understand their position and not immediately interpose myself, but to give it time, I found that was a powerful elixir. And of all the things that I could talk about, I think this is one where, we talk about active listening. Active listening, that's fine. That's 1980s stuff. I'm talking about benign curiosity. That benign curiosity is infinitely more powerful, and its effects are so dramatically more demonstrable, because benign curiosity is something that we rarely get, and we treasure that.
Wow. I've never heard it described as benign curiosity. I think it's brilliant in its simplicity. And for you, when you think about the term benign curiosity, how are you conceptualizing that?
Well, something so simple as I get into a foreign city, and I get in a cab or whatever, and I may ask the person, what is that on the? Oh, that's really cool. I may ask them. I was born overseas, so to me, nobody in Florida was born. It comes from Florida. Everybody in Florida is from somewhere else. So I'm always asking folks, "Where's your family from?" And I always get a positive response. Oh, really? Lebanese? Oh, I love Lebanese food. Best candy in the world. Best candy in the world. And they just, and open up. But in negotiations, benign curiosity is a demonstrable attempt on my part to understand their position, to understand this is how we value it. Where most people make the mistake is they immediately begin to challenge. No, I don't want to challenge. That will come. I want them to voice how they got to this place. And in doing so, they may also reveal the weaknesses in their argument. Well, we consulted experts and we think that this is where it's the value point, where there's a lot to unpack there. It's like, well, I mean, that's fantastic. So you've been looking at this for years, right? And you've been doing, and the more interested you are in their process, what you're building in psychology, we call this transference and countertransference. We're at a deeper level. We're establishing a connection because I'm not challenging anything they say. I just want to understand as best I can where they're coming from. Now, obviously, some people are going to be stoic and they're not going to reveal very much. And sometimes, some negotiations, they're transactional, and it's like, okay, the car dealer, he's going to hit me up for $1,200 because that's what this model car on average they're going to hit you up for. And that doesn't mean I'm not going to try and negotiate. But I want to try to explore as much as I can about them. I want to explore the words that they use. You said that you were troubled by this. What did you mean by troubled by it? Is it like an external? Is it internal? Is it something else? So I use that information to dig deeper, and the more they talk, the greater the connection that there is, as long as, and this is critical, you remain neutral in its benign curiosity. And that's different than active listening. Benign curiosity is taxing. I had you'll appreciate this because I know you read a lot of my stuff. I had a spy case one time where I had been interviewing this guy for hours. And when we got up at the break, my partner looks at my back and she says, "Did you spill a drink?" And I go, "Why?" She says, "You have sweat from your belt line all the way to your shoulders." And I said, "That's sweat." that I earned my money that day. But that's where benign curiosity came in, because the worst thing I could have done was challenge a suspect. But by being benignly curious, I got him to talk in ever more details and never interrupted him once. I would just, "Well, what do you mean? What do you mean by that?" And I think it's a very effective tool to use.
This is great. Joe, I love this. I appreciate this. Thank you for the contributions that you've made to the field over the years. And I am excited to promote this book, and hopefully we can chat again soon in the future.
I hope so. I think the work that you do is so great, because I know you love knowledge and you share it, and I think that's the most magnificent thing that we can do. So thank you for having me.
That was the first part of today's masterclass. Up next, we'll hear from another expert with a different approach, giving you even more strategies to add to your toolkit. Let's keep it rolling. How about you just start off by telling the listeners about yourself and what you do and your background?
My name is Gary Noesner, and I retired as the chief of the FBI's Crisis Negotiation Unit. I retired in 2003 after 30 years in the FBI, and 23 of those years I was a negotiator, and the last 10 years I was the chief negotiator. And in that capacity, traveled around the United States and the world teaching negotiations, and involved in quite a few major negotiation situations, both domestically and internationally: terrorism, kidnappings, hijackings, prison riots, right-wing militia standoffs, and religious zealous sieges like Waco. So, through those experiences, my own, and working with my team and other negotiators, I came to appreciate some of the core skills that are necessary to be an effective negotiator, an effective communicator, to become effective in building positive interpersonal relationships. So my premise, I guess, basically is that if the skills and approaches we used in a very significant crisis, life and death situation, if they work in those situations, then shouldn't they be pretty effective in less life-threatening situations that we all get into every day? So that's basically it. I wrote a book after I retired called Stalling for Time. Get it certainly on Amazon and elsewhere. It kind of chronicles not only my personal story, but the evolution of law enforcement negotiations and the key principles therein. That book was used as a basis for a 2018 six-part miniseries on the Paramount Network about Waco, where Michael Shannon played me. Pretty good stuff. He improved on the original quite significantly, and we just filmed the second season this summer that'll be out next year. And also I've done quite a few documentaries and podcasts that we talked about. And Netflix has a very big 3-part documentary on Waco coming out next year that I'm heavily involved in too. So other than that, I'm retired, living large, and enjoying life. Kwame, I've kind of learned that you're too young, you're not there yet, but there's a time in life where you have this rare combination of elements, and it's time, financial security, and health. And you really have to think about those and decide in this great time that you have, what are you going to do with it? How do you want to spend it? What's your hobbies, your interests, your travel desires, whatever it might be. But when you stop to think about it, when you're young, you don't have the time or the money. When you get too far beyond where I am, then your health starts to go bad. So, if you're fortunate enough to have reached a point where, you're financially secure and you're healthy and you have the time to do things, then, I think about that a lot. And I think it's really a really important thing to consider. I know too many people who've gotten to the retirement years, such as they are, and really don't have a plan or an idea and don't have a purpose. And a lot of them die, particularly men. For women, historically, it's been the empty nest syndrome that they always talk about. The children are gone, and the woman might feel, from my generation, what's her purpose now? And for men, it's when you leave your job, your career, your sense of who you are and what you do. And a lot of people don't handle that very well. You should be thinking about what's the next phase? What's the thing I want to do in my life next? So that's a very long answer to your question. I'll try to be brief on the others, but
Gary, never be brief on this podcast. Okay. No, this is incredible. I love all of this. And there's so many different avenues for us to explore, just professionally, skill wise, and then also life wise too, because I know that this skill that you've developed of negotiation, conflict resolution, and relationship building has served you well in your personal life as well. Because like I said, everybody that talks about you to me has nothing but incredible things to say. There's a reason for that. So I think we can explore all of those things.
Well, I appreciate that, Kwame. Coming from you, but I think hopefully you gain wisdom. We all gain wisdom as we get older. We go through life's about making mistakes and making adjustments, and you never stop making mistakes, and hopefully you never stop making the adjustments. But hopefully you get to a point in time where your mistakes are fewer and fewer, and they're not as egregious when they happen. And that's called wisdom. It's really interesting to me. Now I feel a responsibility to be a bit of a mentor, as I'm sure you do as well. But particularly when you get to be my age, you realize there's things I wish I'd known at an earlier age. There's things that I joke when I talk to college audiences, and I talk to the guys, and I said, boy, if I knew how to talk to people back then, I'd had a lot more interesting relationships in college. Let me just put it that way, because, guys particularly, we always want to posture ourselves. I'm a good athlete. I have a fast car. I hang out with some cool guys. We do neat things. That's all a bunch of malarkey. When you meet somebody you're interested in, you really want to find out about them and learn about what interests them and what issues are of concern to them, or what excites them in life, and what's their goals and aspirations. And if you take the time and invest the effort in doing that, it comes back to you as well. But people want to associate with, work with, hang out with people that they respect and who respect them. And it's so terribly simple that I almost feel guilty talking about it. Say, oh, this guy's a guru. No, it's just plain old common sense. Just be a good, likable human being, be interested in other people. And that gives you influence. That gives you the ability to gain others' respect and accomplish things in life. It just does.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that's most interesting about what you said is the fact that when I've stumbled upon your work and the things that you said then are consistent with the things that you're saying now and the things that I hear other really great negotiators say. And it's so interesting how consistent the fundamentals are across jurisdictions, across different lifestyles, generations, and just throughout the time. It's really fascinating. What would you say are those core truths that we should hold on to in order to be better communicators in general?
Well, you could go to the old, the biblically based golden rule: treat others like you want to be treated. I mean, that's always a good one. That translates into almost every society and every religion historically. But that makes a lot of sense. I mean, will you be taken advantage of sometimes? Certainly. Are there people that will try to manipulate you and maybe be successful? But overall, if you treat people the right way and demonstrate a genuine interest in understanding them, then it pays dividends back to you. And it's not manipulation, it's just plain old honest communication. So what makes a good negotiator? Genuineness, sincerity, trustworthiness, reliability. It's almost like the old Boy Scout code, and the number one, I wonder if you can guess it, the number one personality attribute that I've found that is present in all really good negotiators. I don't think you'll guess what it is.
Let me take a standard guess, and then let me take an outside the box guess. I think
All
a
right.
safe guess would be curiosity. I think that's a safe guess.
It's a good one.
Let me try an outside of the box guess. I would say it is either going to be like humility or openness. So humility, not always like being willing to be proven wrong, but like openness, just saying, I am open enough to hear what you are saying without judgment. Those would be my outside the box guesses.
Well, and I think those are excellent ones, and I think they're all very valid. But it's funny, I thought about this a lot through the years. What are those attributes? Because I do get asked that. What's the attribute? What are the attributes of a good negotiator? And it all came down to one word for me. And you may laugh: likability. Plain old, good old fashioned likability. Just being a likable person. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean something different to each and every of us? Well, maybe so, but I think most of us get a sense of how that translates. So, you and I are just meeting here for the first time, although we know about each other. So, I suspect we'll both leave this interview and say, I really liked Kwame. That was really a fun conversation. He's somebody very intellectually curious. He's got great ideas. I enjoyed talking to him. It was stimulating for me. I hope it was stimulating for him. And I'll look forward to another opportunity to meet him. Well, what made me feel that way about you? Likability. You're likable. I hope I'm likable. And so I don't know. People can have a different perspective and a different word, but I've tried to. It always boils down to that for me.
This is so fascinating because it's one of my favorite sayings is the sign of a brilliant insight is that it seems obvious in hindsight. And you're so right, because when I think about the like the negotiation experts who come onto this show, and the people who I know are good negotiators and the people who I've negotiated with and enjoyed the experience, and I know they got a good deal and vice versa, they're all likable. I can't think of anybody in this industry who is just like fundamentally at their core unlikable. And I think it's so fascinating because I believe sometimes it seems as though we have a bias towards the complex because we have you coming on the podcast. You're a legend in the field. I know you would not describe yourself that way, but it is in fact the truth, right? And the principles that you've given us thus far are very attainable. And when I think about likability, sometimes we can overthink this. What are the elements that you believe are critical to being more likable, even in tough conversations?
Yeah, I think what makes you likable is, and you touched on a few of them, it's a demonstration of curiosity about others. It's a desire to learn, in this context, from others, to hear about their experiences, to share their joy or frustration or whatever in between that they're expressing, and coming across as honest and sincere and genuine. I mean, genuine is a really important thing. When I think of, what I always tell audiences, Kwame, is all the years I was involved in law enforcement negotiations, I always got in the habit of trying to get information from the person that surrendered, whether I was talking to him or someone else. And of course, the question we always ask is, what did we say that made you come out? Because we want to know, we want to repeat this. And the answer was always the same. And it's insightful. And the answer is, I don't remember what you said, but I like the way you said it. Now, if you could package that, that's worth pure gold.
Oh, this is so good. So just going through this list, you said curiosity about the other person. You want to learn about them. You want to hear their experiences. You share in their joy or frustration, and you come across as honest and sincere. I want to focus on those last two. Sharing in their joy and frustration, because in the podcast, we talk a lot about emotional intelligence, the importance of acknowledging and validating the emotions and things like that. And thank you. And when you think about the emotional element of it, this is much easier said than done. Because, all right, somebody's feeling frustrated, they're feeling upset and everything, but I might fundamentally disagree with this person. I might not like what that person is currently doing. And in your case, you're dealing with murderers, people who are like the toughest kind. How do you share in their emotionality?
Well, I found there's generally something good in almost everyone. I mean, I was asked the other day about David Koresh, who was a pretty manipulative, pretty unlikable person in a lot of ways, although he had great loyalty amongst his followers. But there were aspects of his personality that you could find likable and charming even, and interesting, that made you want to learn more. What makes this person tick? How do they view the world? And I think, I think that's important. I suspect having a cup of coffee with Charles Manson would be interesting. It's not that you're going to take him home for Christmas dinner, but I'm sure you would walk away. I mean, I interviewed Ted Turner once. I can't say what it was about, and I'll never forget that interview as long as I live. It was just amazing to be around that man and to see his brain move at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And that's probably the way he became so successful in building this, news media empire. People like that fascinate me, and so you mentioned curiosity before, and I think that's part of it. Instead of looking for reasons not to like somebody because of this quirky habit or this outside personality, this inflated ego, whatever it is, rather if you say, well, that is very, very interesting. That's very interesting to hear his take on life or her take on life or her perspective. So I think, I think it's hard to fake sincerity. I mean, you can get away with it now and then, but I think a good negotiator comes across as someone wanting to help someone get out of it. In my former life, the kind of negotiations I did, want to help you get out of a situation. And when I say that and express that, it comes across in a believable way. And, that's when you typically get to a point where the perpetrator will say, Gary, I just don't know how to get out of this. Now, for me, I mean, the marquee lights just went on. This person's now soliciting my opinion, my perspective, my thoughts. And this gives me now the opportunity to say, well, I know one thing, killing your boss isn't going to get your job back. And, maybe we can explore some other ways for you to address this wrong that you think happened to you in your workplace. There may be other alternatives. Maybe you can take some legal action or whatever. But, you're talking about engaging in a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Now, if I'd told him that 2 hours earlier, I hadn't yet earned the right to be someone he listened to or paid attention to. But through the course of our interaction, if I've been respectful and genuine, and I've demonstrated that I understand what he's going through and how he feels about it, if I'm good at doing all those things, then we will get to a point where I've now earned the right. I've worked for it. I've earned the right to be of influence. You and I have never met in person, and you say, okay, I know Gary's work. I've heard about him from others, but in the 10 minutes now that we've spoken, you would probably, and I don't mean to put any thoughts or words in your mouth, but you'd probably say like, it was interesting talking to Gary. I might run this idea by him that I've been thinking about, and see what he thinks. I don't know what makes us like other people or be likable. It's kind of like the Supreme Court judge said about pornography. I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. Well, I think we know likability when we see it, and genuineness and sincerity. Again, you can be fooled sometimes by people. I have. I'm sure everyone has. This person comes across initially as really nice, and then you say, this person's interests are not in my best interests. And it's okay. We gain the wisdom to pick that out. But for the most part, we have pretty good instincts about the people we're engaging with. And do they give us a good feeling? I mentioned I'd just done another podcast, and I mentioned that I recently met a new friend. And my wife knows the couple better than I do. And I didn't like this guy at first. I just didn't get his sense of humor. And I just, my wife, what do you think? I said, I don't know. Not my kind of person. But after 2 or 3 more meetings, I think he's great now, and I really like the person. I get his humor now. I finally got it. And it's kind of fun to be around him. You have to be able to invest a little bit of time in that.
Oh, there are so many gems of wisdom. The first one, I think, is something that I believe is the most important thing that's ever been said on the podcast that I really want my employees to hear is that, and I quote, murdering your boss isn't going to make the situation better. So
you may want to have that printed and put behind your office chair there,
Exactly.
But you know what that, on a serious note, what that describes is a situation driven by emotion, high emotion. And the first job of a negotiator in the law enforcement context, and sometimes in the civilian context, is to lower the temperature, to de-escalate, to stop the confrontation, stop moving around in the quicksand is how I used to like to say it. When I was a kid, every movie growing up, they had one episode with somebody walking in the quicksand and they'd move around and go down quicker. I don't even know if quicksand exists, but I used to love that in the movies. But it's a great vehicle. But it's we just have to think about these things. And I think, I make mistakes all the time. Don't say, oh, this Gary's so wise, he must have this perfect life. But we all make mistakes and we all misread situations and we probably say things we regret. But overall, hopefully when we have an important situation that we're dealing with domestically or otherwise, hopefully we say, I really need to focus on listening to this person and understanding them and try to convey to them that I'm doing this sincerely and genuinely. I want to know. I want to know your journey. How did you get to this podcast? How did you get to your work as a negotiator, Kwame? Well, you told me earlier that you felt years ago you were pretty bad at this. And you probably took it as a personal challenge. So how can I make myself better at this? How can I be the best person I can be and be successful in engaging with other people? Well, in relaying to you what I just did, if I got that right, and I think I did because your head's nodding, you're saying, yeah, he heard me before. That's not trickery. It's not manipulation. I was listening. And I want you to know I was listening. And it's such a simple thing that we forget it. You mentioned earlier, and I think you were so spot on with that, Kwame, that sometimes the most powerful things are so simple, and yet we don't do it. That's why when I know there's a lot of gurus in our business, and when somebody says, whenever I see someone say these 10 steps to close the deal or be successful, and I said, okay, that's great, whatever, but it's not what I do. You can do those 10 steps, but if you're not coming across in a personable way, if you're not conveying genuineness and sincerity, you're generally not going to win the business, or you're not going to keep the business. And so that's the secret sauce. That's the ingredient that makes it work. We can all follow the cookbook. All right, okay, I'm going to negotiate with so-and-so. Let me open this is a chapter on selling widgets. Okay, I do these 6 things. And I mean, that's great if it works for people, but it's not me.
Yeah. Oh, and I mean, it speaks to your authenticity, which is part of the efficacy as well, because you don't need to refer back to any like tips or tricks or anything. This is just you being you, implementing these techniques and strategies with authenticity over and over again.
I always go into a negotiation thinking I'm going to be successful. Always. Not because I recognize I will make mistakes. I will say things that I probably shouldn't have said. I will express things that could have been expressed better. But at the end of the day, that person is more likely to say just what I told you earlier. I don't remember what you said, Gary, but I like the way you said it. I mean, I've literally had that mentioned to me in ending a crisis. And I said, well, there's power there. There's a power there that we don't recognize. That the way you said something, the way you project your genuineness, your likability. I mean, it's so important. I just, how many times you've been to a social function and, you're there with your significant other and one of you's in the living room, one is the kitchen. You don't even see each other all night long. You get back in the car to go home and you say, hey, how was your night? Did you have fun? Yeah. Would you meet anybody interesting? Yeah, I met so-and-so, those new people that moved down the street. What an interesting couple. You would not believe where they lived before they came here. They lived in Senegal and they did this and they did that and they had these experiences. And all of a sudden, you can tell that your significant other is very animated about something that they heard that they found very interesting and enjoyable. Good stuff, and learn something, had a new experience, talk to somebody different. I love it. I just think it's the greatest thing in the world.
So there are a couple of other things that I'd like to add to your list, because it's not just the fact that you have the skills and strategies and everything. You have the authenticity and you have the genuine sincerity as well. But I can tell when you're talking about human connection and interaction, there's like a genuine exuberance and excitement that you get just from learning about other people. And I want to go deeper in that to see how we can begin to start to cultivate that level of exuberance, because I think if you're just genuinely interested in people, you start to almost organically utilize some of these tools that you've talked about already in the podcast episode. So how do you generate that genuine curiosity and desire to learn?
Yeah, I don't think it's a formula, or you just change hats and say, okay, I'm going to go in this situation. Now I'm going to do all these things. I think you have to develop these skills in your everyday life. If you want to be really good at this. I have a friend, Dr. Mike Webster, who was a psychologist with the RCMP for years, and I used to bring him to every one of our negotiation courses. He was the most effective communicator I've ever known in my life. And it was so sincere and so genuine that literally everybody he meets thinks they're his best friend. And there's not a phony thing about it. He just is interested in people to a degree to which I've never seen before, and I pale in comparison. But, it's that kind of, I always tell a story, and if you've heard any of my podcasts, you may have even heard the story. So forgive me for those who have heard before, but I have a habit when I travel and give speeches, less and less these days, and I go to a hotel, I have a target du jour. And my target du jour is whatever poor, unfortunate person is sitting next to me at the hotel bar. I don't like room service, and I don't like to sit in a restaurant by myself. So I go to the hotel bar and I, have a glass of wine and a steak, or watch the basketball game, talk to the bartender, whatever. But whoever sits next to me, I have made a little game. I'm going to find out everything I can about this person. And I always tell a story. I'm in Memphis, Tennessee, and this guy comes in and he's in a real rush and he's wearing medical scrubs, and he walks up to the bar, standing right next to where I'm sitting, and he tries to get a drink to take back to his room. And the bartender goes to make his drink. And I said, "Excuse me, sir, I couldn't help but notice, is there some sort of an emergency here in the hotel?" He says, No. I said, "Well, I saw you have medical scrubs on, so I assumed something's going on here." He said, No, I'm coming back from work. I said, "Oh, may I ask where you work?" He said, "I'm a medical device salesman." And I go, Oh, that's interesting. So may I ask why you're wearing surgical scrubs? Well, I go into the surgery and I show doctors how to install artificial knees and ankles and so forth. I said, "So you teach doctors?" Now, I've just given him a big promotion on the social pecking order. He's someone that teaches doctors. And anyway, we talk and talk and talk. He didn't get back to his room with his drink. He stayed there for 20 or 30 minutes. His name was Jim. His wife was Mary. I know his kids' names. I knew where he lived, what kind of car he drove, where he went to school, and how he got into this business, how long he'd been doing it, how much he enjoyed it, on and on and on and on. And finally, it's time for me to go to bed. Party's over. I said, "Jim, I got to tell you, I learned more about this field of artificial joints than I would have ever known about." I said, "This is fascinating stuff. I've never talked to anybody that does this." He said, "Oh, yeah. He said, "What was your name again?" I said, "Oh, my name," he hadn't even got my name. "It's Gary Noesner." And he said, "Oh, what did you do?" I said, "Well, I'm retired. I was the chief hostage negotiator for the FBI. Good night. See you later." And I walk out, and he's going like, he was saying, I know he was thinking, gee, he might have heard a good story or two as well. I didn't give him much of a chance, Kwame, so it wasn't fair. But what I'm saying is, you can invest the time and effort in getting to know somebody. People like to talk about themselves. They like to be in the frame of reference where they're comfortable. And you'll get your turn. If I had engaged with Jim long enough, we would have got around to him asking me about my life and my career, and that's fine. I didn't give him much of a chance there. But, I tell another story. I was in Texas, and I'm at a bar, and there's a young man sitting next to me. His hobby is tightrope walking. Now, who do you meet that does that? So next thing you know, he's showing me videos on his camera of him walking in his backyard with a rope tied between the trees, and he's got the balance beam. It was fascinating. What made you get interested in this? Why do you do this? That's unbelievable. How all the whole 9 yards. We're still Facebook friends. That was 10 years ago, and I just think everybody has a story. Everybody has a story. And if you invest the time in listening to the story, and not just the story, but how they feel about it. It's not just what happens to us in life. It's how do we feel about it? What impact does it have on us? If somebody tells you about, they were close to their grandmother who died last year, and then you see them start to choke up. Well, it's more than just saying, "Oh, too bad your grandmother died." Now you got to say, "Sounds like you and your grandmother had a very close relationship." Yes, we did. She raised me. Wow. Can you tell me more about that? Or, whatever it might be. You just tune your ear into picking up on what's important to people and giving them a chance to share it.
Oh, so many gems. Let's do a bit of a callback here, because
Okay.
one of the things that
I'm hard to control, Kwame. I'm hard to.
No, I love it because you're giving me so many targets. This is great for me. And one of the things that if you were go back to that story you told about the person who wanted to kill their boss. I don't know, Jim, it's just stuck in my head. But one of the things that you mentioned was it took 2 hours for him to say, "Hey, I'm stuck in this situation. I don't know what to do to get out of it." And now, with this conversation that you had with Jim, who's married to Mary, right? He has 2 kids. With that situation, it wasn't until the very end that he said, "Hey, what's your name?" And then you shared, "I'm Gary, blah, blah, blah," right? And so one of the things you mentioned at the end of that story is you said you will get your turn to share your piece. And then earlier you said you have to earn the right to be able to move into that next step of the conversation. And so I want to dig deeper into the reality that a major portion of your success comes from your patience. It's just diligent applications of the core fit principles that you've been discussing this whole time, and just going through it over and over and over and over again until the person feels comfortable enough to move.
Yeah, you remember I mentioned to you a little early in our conversation that I always go into a negotiation feeling I'm going to be successful because I'm comfortable and secure in knowing what I can control and what I can't. It's the old serenity prayer. So what I do know is I can control my behavior and how I present myself. I can't control the other person, the client, the vendor, the dispute person you're with, whatever it might be. I can't control that. I can try to influence it. And my experience is that the best way to have a positive influence on it is for me to maintain self-control and to listen and engage and understand. That still doesn't guarantee an outcome. I can tell a negotiator, you can do all these things perfect, and they still kill themselves. I used to, when I was teaching negotiators, suicide is a very frequent thing that police negotiators do, the most. And, I've had police officers, I've done 100 suicides and no one's ever killed themselves. I said, well, you're a lucky, I'm sure you're very, very good at what you do. But I said, if you do enough of these, somebody's going to kill themselves and it's not your fault. And you have to go in there knowing this because you don't 100% control them. You don't. You can try to be a positive influence. But if you go in knowing the limitations of what you can and cannot do, it's like in a business negotiation. I know I'm going to engage with the client in a certain way, but the client may have issues beyond my control. They may have a comptroller or a finance guy that is totally fixated on price. They may have a CEO who has a habit of overturning any decision anybody else may. There could be a myriad of problems beyond this person's control. But all you can say is, I'm going to really focus on my interaction with this person and make this as positive as I can, knowing I'm going to lose some of these deals. That's okay. Don't burn a bridge. Don't say, just wasted 2 hours of my time. You just say, well, I'm sorry we didn't win your business on this one. I hope you'll give me another opportunity if you find that the direction you are moving in is not satisfactory, or you have some other needs where you think I might help you. Maintain the relationship. Don't get sour. Don't get bitter. Don't be, aggressive in your response. And that'll come back and pay dividends. I've had a number of clients when I was in the private sector who went with the cheaper deal. Very high percentage of time they're disappointed because they didn't get what they wanted. They went with the low bidder and they got a crappy product. And then they come back to you, oh, okay. I'd like to discuss that thing we talked about before. I said, I know my price point was higher, but I still think there's a qualitative issue here that I think, in the long run will benefit you and your company. So things like that. Don't burn bridges. Just, let the insults bounce off you. I start a chapter of each of my book, Stalling for Time, with a quote, and my favorite quote of all time, and that's why I put it in the book, was the partial quote from Rudyard Kipling. If you keep your head about you when all else are losing theirs. Well, that's a powerful thing. Let me give you another example. I worked at TW-847 hijacking back in 1985 and out of Beirut. And I spent a lot of time, 5 years working that case. And I interviewed every American, 150 Americans on the plane. I interviewed every one of them multiple times. And there would be a case where the plane went from Athens to Beirut to Algiers to Beirut to Algiers to Beirut. And I would ask Kwame, on the second landing in Beirut, can you tell me where you were on the plane? And you would say, we landed twice in Beirut? Totally lost your ability to think and and engage in survival kind of skill sets needed. Then I talked to another person, Kwame 2. Where were you? And it's, oh, well, I was in seat 21F. I was there for like 10 minutes, and then they moved me to seat 4B. I sat next to so-and-so and such, and here's what we did. Here's a lot, very detailed memory. And you say, how can these two people who experienced the same thing have diametrically opposed recollections about what happened? Well, there's some psychology involved in survival, and some people block things out. Other people, really raise their game up and go into a survival mode of gathering information. But, these are interesting things about human behavior. And the more you know about that, the more helpful it is.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. And Gary, I could talk to you all day. And one of these days we will. I'll make it out to the East Coast. We'll hang out sometime in person. But before you go, I want to ask you one question. Sure. That comes up a lot, where people hear about the empathetic approach that you're talking about, understanding, listening. One of the things that I've really appreciated about this episode is that, like you said, there are no gimmicks here. There's no quick tricks or anything. It's just diligent and patient and disciplined application of the fundamentals over time, understanding that it will work one way or another, right? You're in control. Either you will move closer to the right direction, whether or not you get a deal.
Yeah, and don't put unrealistic expectations on yourself. Yeah. I can control myself, and I know how I'm going to approach this engagement, this sale, this, discussion, whatever it is. You can control that. And, that is greatly enhances your probabilities of success, but it doesn't guarantee it. It just doesn't guarantee it. And go in there knowing that. Fine. I'm going to give this, it's like the football player that loses the big game, but he said, you know what? I didn't leave anything off the field. I gave it my all. And we didn't win the game. It was unfortunate, but, I gave it everything I could. Well, I think that's what we all want to do in life. I don't expect success, but I want my performance to be the best it can be to enhance my chances of success in sales and relationship building, whatever it might be.
Makes sense. And when you think about the reality that in life, there will be some bad actors. There will be people who try to manipulate you. There will be people who will pretend to be sincere and genuine, but they're not. That happens. And you mentioned it in passing, but I want to go back to that, because that fear is something that holds people back from fully, wholeheartedly, and authentically engaging in these conversations. And so for the person who says, Gary, I understand what you're saying about empathy and being vulnerable and being open. I understand that, but I'm afraid of somebody taking advantage of me. What do you say to that person?
And they may. But, the more comfortable you are with yourself, the better you're able to assess someone else and their motivations. You asked me earlier, I can't remember the form of the question. One of the, the attributes of being a successful negotiator, I mentioned likability, but it's also being yourself. Negotiators, I saw this more times than I can even begin to tell you in law enforcement context. When negotiators feel the stress of a situation and then try to be something they're not, it's a recipe for problems. But if you can be yourself, that's what's going to come across. I tell negotiators, okay, your best friend from when you were a kid lives on the opposite coast and calls you up in the middle of the night, lost my job, wife is leaving me. You don't say, it's pretty late here in the East Coast, Kwame, and let's talk later this week. Good luck with all that. If you're a true friend, you're probably going to spend the night on the phone with that dear friend of yours, helping them deal with this crisis. You will be successful if success is possible. That's the same approach you have to take with somebody that you don't have the relationship with. I'm going to invest my undivided time and attention and energy to trying to resolve this conflict, help this person figure out a way through this problem. And more often than not, that's going to lead to success.
Oh, this is so good. Gary, do you see this? You see all these notes? Like two full pages of notes. I don't know if I was interviewing you or just listening to the podcast, but regardless, I got a lot out of this, and I'm sure that a lot of listeners did as well. And with the time left, just remind the listeners again how folks can get in touch with you and about the book and those type of things.
Yeah, the book "Stalling for Time: My Life as an FBI Hostage Negotiator," which sort of chronicles my career and my life story, and the law enforcement negotiation profession. You can certainly get that on Amazon or any other book vendor. I have a website, Gary Noesner, oneword.com. There's a lot of stuff on there about articles I've written and podcasts, links, and, interviews and things of that nature. And I can even be contacted through that. So, I always respond to folks. My wife laughs at me because I'll even do an interview with a high school class. I mean, I get stuff like this all the time. I said, what else I got to do? I'm not trying to make money. I said, but these kids are interested enough to reach out to me and brave enough. I wouldn't have done something like that at a young age. You go to somebody that's a public figure and you say, hey, could we talk to you on our class? Would you call in and talk to us? I mean, unless I'm really busy, I'm going to do it. Why not? Now I'm going to set myself up for problems here, but now I got to go disconnect my phone number, Kwame. But, it's all part of that, again, at my age, wanting to give back a little bit. And, it's always nice. There's never a way to put a statistical number, but to know that there's a lot of police officers, particularly out there, who are alive today because they didn't have to go in and confront a dangerous subject, because the skills that my colleagues help teach throughout the law enforcement world, have really saved a lot of lives, and that's that's pretty good. I can live with that.
Yeah, I would say that's a little bit more than pretty good, my friend. It's incredible work. We appreciate you taking the time to come on the show, and just thanks for your incredible career.
No, thanks. It was a pleasure. I'm glad we finally get to meet and. Not in person, in video or whatever. So, call anytime.
Appreciate it. You've just heard one powerful perspective, and now we're moving on to the next. A fresh voice with a new angle on the same challenge, so you can keep expanding your skills. Let's dive in. Melissa, thanks for joining us today.
Kwame, I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, we are excited to have you, my friend. So how would you get us started by telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
I can do that. So my name's Melissa Fortunato. I'm an FBI agent, have been for 23 years. I'm not your typical FBI agent. I have not my whole life wanted to be in the FBI. I started with a psychology degree, and I was a counselor at a rape crisis center. And I really thought that's where my life would go. I would go on to be a psychologist and do counseling the rest of my life. Just the way life turns out, opportunities present themselves. Always try to say yes to just the next step and see where it goes. And I had an opportunity, and it developed into me applying to the FBI and getting in. So I've been in our New York City office. I'm now in our Cleveland office. I do investigations. That's the bulk of what my day is. But I also have additional duties. I originally started doing and worked for several years and trained as an undercover agent. Did that for a few years. I don't do that anymore. I, for the past 15 years, have been working as a crisis negotiator, hostage negotiator for the FBI.
That's amazing.
The one thing I will say is whether it's my agent duty of doing investigations, whether it's being a hostage negotiator, doing a kidnap for ransom, a barricade, whatever, or being an undercover, my psychology background, my counseling background has been the thing that I use probably every minute of every day. So we talk to people in interviews, interrogations, just answering the phone for the person with a mental illness that thinks, someone's coming to kill them, or in my undercover or negotiation work. It has been the skill that I use the most.
That makes sense. I know my undergrad degree is in psychology, and when I was mediating one case, somebody said, "So what do you do?" I said, "I'm a lawyer," and they're like, you don't sound like a lawyer. And then I said, well, I have a background in psychology. And they say, there it is. There it is. And I tell people all the time, when you get a better understanding of how the brain works and what people are going through, and you can communicate empathetically, it really helps. It really amplifies everything else that you want to do as it relates to negotiation, difficult conversation, and just human interaction as a whole. So it's really great to see that you're able to use that at the highest level.
Yes. It's so interesting. One of my favorite quotes is Erik Erikson. I don't know if you know the quote, but he says, the more you know yourself, the more patience you have for others, or for something like that. And I thought that is so true, that if you can really understand people, and if you're fascinated by people, I think you have much more grace. You're really willing to give people the benefit of the doubt, because you can remember when you did stupid things or, made mistakes. And so I just think can be kinder.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. This is great. And Melissa, I'm very excited about this episode, because this is going to be completely story based. And so you're going to share 2 or 3 stories from your career, and then one from your personal life as well. And we're going to use those as case studies to exemplify and demonstrate some of the negotiation techniques that people can use in their day-to-day life. So how would we just start off with the first story about the wedding?
Yes. So I have been so lucky in my FBI career that I have gotten to do just fun, interesting, and challenging things. So one thing I love about the FBI is if you raise your hand, they will give you the responsibility if you're willing to take it. So one of it started in an undercover case that I became involved in. And initially I got brought in, it was already going on, but there were 2 male undercovers that had been working it for a little while, and they were going to move on to meeting the next higher level target. But what happened was they were going to go overseas to do this big deal. And the target said, hey, when you come over here, we'll get you all set up with women who will keep you entertained, if you know what I mean. And the difficult part was, both of these men are FBI agents. They have wives and children, and obviously wouldn't want to be in compromising positions professionally. And so initially I was just brought in as, hey, we need to have a buffer that helps these male undercovers. They just need a bit of cover so they don't have to be put in these situations. So I was like, I can do that. That's easy, right? But what ended up happening was that the targets overseas had strong connections in that community. And our concern was, when we go over, they could, do the hotel house cleaning to hit your room to see, are you staying together? Are you not staying together? So it ended up being this very uncomfortable moment with me and the other undercover, who we had met for probably 20 minutes, half hour before. We had to stay together for 2 weeks in a foreign country in the same hotel. Super awkward, because a lot of things happen in 2 weeks and you really get to know each other. But what was so interesting is, while we were over there in the 2 weeks, we were talking to the case agent, and the case had gone so well and had really taken them to the next level for this case. And the case agent was like, I don't know how we're going to get all of our targets kind of in one place when we do the arrests, because they're spread out throughout the country and internationally at this point. And I jokingly said, you should have Lou and I get married, and we'll invite everybody to the wedding. And the case agent, to his credit, was like, we're totally doing that. And so for the next year on the case, we built in that Lou and I were going to get married. And so we sent wedding invitations. I got to call our higher headquarters and get a big, fat, fancy diamond ring I got to wear every time we went out. And so then every time that there was a meeting, Lou and I would go, and it just showed Lou in a different light to the targets. It enabled them to get to know me, and I could get to know them and their partners. I could ask different questions in different ways. And that's why I think one of the best things about the FBI is our diversity of races, genders, backgrounds. It brings so much more to the table, because as a female, I can do different things that you, Kwame, as a male, or my partner, Lou, certain things you may not be able to do or just don't seem appropriate for you, but I could get away with. So, I can take a bunch more pictures. I can ask much more probing questions than men tend to ask each other. And I can also gather more intelligence by kind of coming at it from a different angle and a different approach. And so we did this for a year, and then we brought everybody in for our wedding. And I mean, at one point we had a bachelorette party. We had a rehearsal dinner. So as you talk about, in negotiations, in undercover, it's all about building trust, having credibility, having like an intimacy, a relationship with this person. I think it enabled not only for all of us involved in the case to really sort of show ourselves in a different way. It made the targets feel that they were more intimately involved, which built the trust level, which made them much more comfortable to open up about all kinds of things, which led us to much different areas and were very productive in the case because we ended up taking the case down. It was a very significant case at that time. But I think what I love about the FBI is they will bring a bunch to the table. I mean, at one point, I think we had like 10 undercovers in a room. And it just made such a more round picture. We always talk about in negotiations and in undercovers is like preparing, setting the stage, shaping your environment. And that's, as undercovers and negotiators, what we try our best to do is to really do an assessment of who you're up against or who you're working with in your team and who you're negotiating with, and trying your best to gather as much of the little pieces of information you can about them from all angles to put together a really complete picture. Sometimes you don't get a full picture, but you just start with what you know. And we tried to use as many people as we could and target people from all different areas and bring that all together to finally have this complete picture on them and then really build this rapport and relationship with them, which then enables us to commit crimes with them and gather evidence and then be able to successfully prosecute the case.
This is fascinating. This is really cool. And I have to start my questions with the obvious one.
Yes.
What happened to the diamond ring?
Well, you'll love this. So I got my diamond ring. And of course, I shouldn't say typical female, but they sent me 5 rings. I just picked the biggest. And, but at the wedding, one of the bad guys bought us a present, which you do at a wedding. And he gave us his and her matching Rolex watches. So at one point I was walking around with like a 4-carat diamond ring, a Rolex on my arm, but all of that then goes back to our FBI headquarters. And the FBI uses that in all kinds of investigations to make people look the part they're trying to portray. So yeah, I don't know, maybe someone's using the Rolex somewhere right now.
Wow. This is fascinating. This is great. And there's so many different angles, but I want to go back to what you said about the value of diversity, because I think this is something that we don't think deeply enough about. So I think you can think about it in terms of the role and responsibility of somebody in diversity, equity, and inclusion within an organization. But when I'm working with procurement teams, I talk to them about the value of diversity in terms of personality, in terms of approach, how important it is, because there are multiple members of a team and we need people who approach things in different ways in order to find value in different ways too. So can you speak a little bit more to the value of diversity when we are negotiating as a team?
Yes. So I know for us, diversity is the biggest thing. And I use the example of the undercover, but it is true. I did another undercover case when I was like 8 months pregnant. And somebody in our office was working a case, counterintelligence case, and they were targeting someone. But the best approach was to send me in to their spouse. And here I come walking in with my big 8-month pregnant belly. You never in a million years think I am who I am as an FBI agent. And so I just think the spouse can then connect with me as a woman, as a mother. So even in procurement or any kind of negotiations, it's all the chances you get to make a connection, take advantage of them. So even as a team, I mean, in our negotiation team, so I run our Cleveland negotiation team, and we could be in our negotiation operations center in the middle of a negotiation, and it could get really stressful at times. But even as a team, we're really trying to come together because everybody has a different opinion. Everybody has a different life experience or picked up something different that maybe I didn't hear. And so it's so important to be respectful, to create an environment where everybody's thoughts and ideas are thrown on the table. We may not use them all, but it's a safe place to throw everything on the table. And then we'll analyze each one and say yes or no, or do we think this will work, or do we not think this will work, or hey, let's try it, see what happens. And so that's why I think diversity is so important, whether that's an age. I'm at the twilight of my career, but there's some new agents that come in that are amazing and smart and wonderful at things I can't do. As a female, it's very different than some of the men that come in, and just how they approach other men is different than if I was approaching you. You may have a different interaction than if you approach with a male FBI agent. It's just, we try to take advantage of all those opportunities and really shape the environment to be the most effective that we can be.
Yeah, this is intriguing. I'm interested to explore a little bit deeper the gender dynamic side of it that you brought up a couple of times. And when you think about gender diversity, what are some examples of further examples of how the different interactions between different genders will result in different types of, value created for the team?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess it depends on the person, really. I should say that. I'm not strongly, I believe women can do wonderful things, but I'm not, rah, rah, go. I just think we all have different strengths. And I think we're socialized in different ways. And so when you bring that to the table in your career, it shows up different. So an example would be in one negotiation that I had. It was this 15-hour barricade standoff. And in the 15 hours, I'm on a loudspeaker trying to get the person who has barricaded themselves inside attention and get them to communicate with me. They're not saying anything. They had already fled from the police. They had already shot at the police. And so now we're just trying to if I can engage with you at all, because for me, my lifeblood, listening and questions. But if I can't get you to respond at all, I'm a little stumped, right? Because I have nothing to work with. So I'm trying all these things over 15 hours. It's cold. I'm tired. At a certain point, I don't want to be here. And we were finally able to get in a robot so we could actually bring the robot right to the person and be able to communicate with them directly. And before I was able to get there, the person that operates the robot started to talk. And I didn't hear the beginning, but as I came in, this male officer was just saying, you got a warrant, you got to come out now, enough of this, let's go. And the person inside which didn't make sense at all, the situation. What do you mean a warrant? He was well aware that he had a warrant. So even his response wasn't making sense. And I just thought, I don't want to get into this fight with him to start. That's not where I want to be. Even though I was tired and cold, and I get the approach, because you're just frustrated after a certain amount of hours. But when finally I just got on and I just said, hey, John, we'll say his name was, is there a reason you can't come out? What's going on? I think it was just a softer approach. It was a different approach because he had already kind of gotten into this headbutting with the other officer that started. And then I think when I came in, and I even said to him, hey, his name wasn't John, but hey, John, it's Melissa. I've been trying to talk to you. I don't know if you've heard me, but I've been yelling over a loudspeaker trying to get your attention for the past 15 hours. I said, is there some reason you can't come out? Because at this point we had knocked out almost every window in his house. We had thrown gas in. I mean, it's not like he didn't know we were there. And then he explains to me, he actually was only had one leg. And so he said, I can't find my crutches. Now, I don't know that was a truthful answer after 15 hours, but at least he probably was tired after 15 hours. He was probably realizing, where is this going? And so it gave him a chance to maybe save face, to maybe try to come to a ending situation. And then I said, okay, well, where are they? And it was enough that then we could see him, I could talk to him, and then we were able to get our SWAT team into a better position to be able to effect the arrest at that point safely. So I think gender-wise, sometimes it can just become more of a battle. And if you change the dynamic of a male to female, you can't help but change the reactions between the two. Sometimes it's just bringing in a new person. It doesn't always have to be a different gender.
Right. Yeah. So I think just there's a lot that we could dig into there. But if we're thinking two big picture type of things, well, first we could say just switching it up in general can be helpful. When we get a different voice in there, there's going to be a different response. But then also thinking about it in terms of gender, with that example, there might have been a situation where it's like, okay, man to man, they might have a little bit of ego where the person's not willing to back down and be more vulnerable and open up. And then when he heard your voice, okay, now I'm paying more attention. I feel a little bit more comfortable opening up. Am I kind of reading that the right way?
I think that's right. I mean, I don't really know what that person on the inside's,
Right.
you know, we're coming to his home. He's barricaded himself in his home. I mean, definitely there's an ego thing. He's afraid his liberty is about to be taken. And it is. I mean, he knew that. Like, so he knows there's a warrant. He knows he's going to go to jail. We had already done a search warrant at his house. He was a child pornography subject. They do not fare well in prison. So all these things are making him, at least in the moment, I think when we started, just digging in.
Yeah.
And so if I had a chance to talk to him for the whole 15 hours, it might have been interesting. We could have got to a different place. I could have understood more about him, but I don't know if just time and all those other factors helped him be much more open to being in a position that we could get in more safely at that time. But I just think it always changes up the dynamic. It's hard in our world. You should always consider maybe switching out negotiators, but even in business negotiations, I think people just get dug in. You know, I started this, I want to finish it. So that's hard sometimes to switch it up that way. But sometimes you switch up tone or a question that you ask. It's just a different way to switch it up, or just change gears with what you're talking about is another way to switch it up if you can't physically change the person.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And one of the things that you mentioned a couple of times was the value of connection. And I think in the business world, in our personal lives, we can get so focused on being right, having the right answer, or whatever it happens to be, that we, like you said, we get dug in and we want to almost beat the person into submission with our moral or intellectual superiority. And,
Yes.
you know, this might surprise people, but people don't like that. They don't like that, right? And when you think about it from your perspective, you could interpret this as a situation where you have a lot of leverage. So you have a situation where there's somebody, you know where they are, and you have the full force of the United States government behind you. And so, I mean, hypothetically, if you wanted to, you could just march in and take everything, right?
Yes.
But you still see the value in connecting, even though you have an incredible amount of leverage and authority in the situation. So why lean so heavily on connection when you have so much leverage?
Because it works. I mean, we lean on it because it works. And I agree with you. For some reason, people do fight it. There's been, you know, a high level academic, you know, Harvard's or whatever, have done studies on this. Very smart people have said, I remember one study, that guy Itchikoff, I don't know if you've seen him, but he talks about high quality listening and how effective it is, that if someone really feels listened to, how they're much more open to maybe changing their opinion. They're much more open to considering your side than if they feel like they're not listened to. People just dig in. And I see that every day in my work, just as an FBI agent, or as I did as an undercover, or as a negotiator. You're right. People want to be heard. I feel like in the world these days, everybody, I don't know if no one's getting listened to anymore, and that's why everybody's screaming so much more. But I just feel like we've gotten to the point in this life where everybody, it's more important to just go to your side and hold firm. And that for some reason, if you're willing to even concede just a little bit, that maybe, Kwame, you have a different perspective than I do, that if I say to you, well, that makes sense, I can understand that part, that somehow I've given up some point, I'm weak on my side. I think there's a strength in being able to see another person's perspective, and adjusting your view, your stance. You still know, we always know, like you said, as FBI agents, I have the power to just come in, grab you and go. But we see a lot of repeat offenders. I don't want to have a bad interaction with you. That does not help my partner that may interact with you when you get out of jail in 5 years or 10 years. If you had a bad experience with me, I then put all future people in danger. That's not what I'm here for. I have a job and I'm willing to do it, and we have a power for it, but I don't have to use it as a hammer, right? I can use it as a reality check to you if you're giving me a hard time. I could say, but here's the thing, I do have a search warrant, and I know that's upsetting to you, and I know you don't want me in your home, but I do have it. But I understand that's hard, right? Because I'm coming in your house and I'm walking on your carpet and dirtying it, and you don't like that. And we could talk about that while the rest of my team does the search. But, so it's okay to say I have a job to do, but I don't have to be all muscle, all strength. I mean, we have so many more tools. Why not use them?
Yeah. And I love your response, because at the very beginning, very simply, you said, because it works.
Yeah.
That's the reason why we do it. And I think a lot of times people wait to feel like doing these things. I want to feel like empathizing. I want to feel like treating people respectfully. Oh, I'm not feeling it today, so that justifies me not doing it. But that doesn't make it effective, right? When it comes down to it, you have a goal. And the reason why you use connectivity, like connection with people, is because it works. And again, you've provided what is an extreme example, because again, you are justified legally to do whatever you like. You have a lot of leverage, right? But you're using connection, which is something that we all have. We all have the ability to use connection, and you're using it because this free tool is the thing that is the most effective. Right. Even as you have like a SWAT team pointing guns at people, right?
Right.
Like,
and
that's incredible.
We do use it. I mean, we use our SWAT team as part of I've talked about shaping our environment, right? We use that. So sometimes I will use them visually to create more of a presence if that's more effective. I may also have them back up if that also would help the situation. So we have this parallel approach with our tactical teams. And the thing that I've loved, I mean, I've been in law enforcement for 23 years, and I've seen the change. We use negotiation so much more now, which I find fascinating, because we have power. We could just use it. But even every part of law enforcement is using negotiators so much more. And our tactical teams, we work so closely together now. I think both realize what we both bring to the table, and how effective they can be. It keeps everybody safe. And if we can have a better interaction, we have nothing but time. We can slow everything down. I would hate to say to a SWAT operator that went in that, we went in too fast and somebody got hurt because, we just wanted to hurry up, or it was cold. I mean, that's not a good enough excuse to that person's family, or even to the person on the inside. If somebody, unfortunately has to get hurt if there's a use of force, I want to say that we tried everything to not have that happen, because we want the world, we want the community to understand, like, we're here as law enforcement just to enforce the laws. We're not here to dominate. That's not what we're trying to do.
Right. It makes so much sense. And one of the things that you mentioned is, that you have the hammer that you could drop if necessary. And from time to time, when it meets your strategic objectives, you remind people, and you called it a check. But what was interesting about the example that you gave is you said, hey, we do have a warrant and we can come in, but I understand that would be very inconvenient for you, right? Because you gave that slight flex to let them know, hey, I do have the power, and I'm choosing not to use the power. And you now, person on the other side, you have an opportunity to have some level of control of this interaction. We can continue to interact together and continue to communicate, or you could put me in a position where I have no choice but to drop said hammer. And so can you give, this is a really important point, because in negotiation, we have, of course, the BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And sometimes when you let somebody know about your BATNA, if you don't do it in the right way, it can come off as a threat, which damages the connection that we work so hard to create. So how do you let people know that you do have power, you do have options, you have a solid BATNA, without it diminishing the quality of the connection that you created?
It's so important. Autonomy is so important. People are desperate for it, right? Everybody wants to feel they have some level of control of something. I think we just talked about this with you with LinkedIn. Like, people are obsessed with control. They are. They obsessed that they have to control everything in every minute of every day. We see it on our side, and I see it on the other side. And so I'm aware of that. And like every good negotiator, every good human, you should always think about, what am I about to say and how would it land? And how would I feel if somebody said that to me? And so I don't want to take somebody's autonomy, especially if you've taken a kindergarten hostage, right? I'm not going to flex on you. But there's a point where I do probably have to give you a reality check of like who we are and what are we doing. And sometimes you have to say the elephant in the room, you have to address it and announce it and talk about it. Because I think it shows your level of respect for that person, that you don't think they're stupid and missing it. It also establishes your credibility by saying, I'm not stupid and I'm not missing this either. And so there's a way to flex, like you said, without it just being muscle flex, right? It could just be your intellectual savvy flex, my using my mind and being creative in the way that I say things to them. Because I've said in negotiations with people, because they'll say, I don't, what are you going to say? I'm not going to go to jail? No, I can't say that. Like, you're too smart. You've been through the system. You know how this goes. But I'm trying to make this that it's not any worse for you, right? Or if you have a room full of hostages, I'm trying to make it so we don't take a step further, right? I'm not going to lie to you and say taking a kindergarten hostage is a good thing. But we can stop it here. We can stop our choices here from going down that path, and we can make a different choice. And so a lot of times what we try to talk people through is changing their direction, influencing that behavioral change stairway is, I want you to go in a different direction. And if I'm smart enough and I'm patient enough and I take my time and develop that relationship and that connection, then I can subtly move people in different directions, mostly because you just present questions to them that have them change their own mind. And that's the most powerful if you can do that. If I can get you to believe where we're going is the right way to go, we could walk out hand in hand because you feel good about it. And that's my ultimate goal, is that we both leave in a better way.
I love that. And with the time we have left, I want to address the personal example of your negotiation skills in action. And it was with your daughter, and it was a medical situation. Can you tell the audience about that one too?
Yeah, I know we had mentioned it before, and I say just talking about people as a negotiator, I don't think people ask enough questions. I think people get afraid or intimidated that if you ask questions, maybe it makes you look stupid, that you don't understand. And so why do you have so many questions? You're not getting this. And so people just keep quiet. And I was telling you about, I had a situation with my daughter, our one daughter, who had to go in the hospital, and she was in the hospital for a few days. And we were meeting with all these different doctors. And so neurologists come in and all these residents, and they're all smart and using big words that I don't even fully understand what they mean or how it relates to my most precious baby here. And I remember in the moment feeling slightly intimidated and overwhelmed I didn't even know where to start with a question, because I felt like I had to go to medical school to be able to understand where they were at. And so I just said, hey, I'm sorry, but I have to get this. And for her sake, I have to understand what's going on. And so I said, can I ask you a bunch of questions? And he said, go ahead. And so I went, and I just went down the list because I didn't understand this part. Okay, now I understand this. How does it relate to that? And okay, now, so what does that mean for this? And where do we go next? And I got done with all my questions. They left. And the next day, one of the residents came back into her room and was just checking in on her. And he said, can I ask you a question? What do you do for a living? And I thought, I don't know what this has to do with anything. So I said, I'm an FBI agent. And he was like, I was wondering, because the way that you asked the questions and how detailed you were in all your questions, I thought, you have to be a lawyer or something. And it just showed me in that moment that I was afraid of looking stupid, and it ended up coming out to make me look better because I looked more engaged and thoughtful and intentional. And it just hit me in that moment. I just thought, you shouldn't be intimidated. You should ask. You should fully, immerse yourself in the situation. If you have questions, ask them. We have so many people in negotiations that you're like, we'll take a break, or there's a break in the negotiation as a team. They're like, did he say XYZ? And what did that mean? And I always say, I don't know. You should ask. Because if you don't know, ask. Because then that way everybody has a clear picture of what's going on. And I think that's the most important thing, because every question gives you more information. More information, the better. Because then we can understand what sort of your interests are, what our options are on the table. And then we can come to a better outcome.
Yeah. And I think this story gives a great example of just two big barriers that get in the way when it comes to asking questions. So one is fear. Fear of what? Maybe fear of getting of the answer that you might receive. It might be fear of looking stupid. I know ego is a big part of it, because when you ask a question, there's a tacit admission of a lack of knowledge. And so we're
Yes.
afraid of sharing that ignorance. And,
Yes.
so that's a problem. But then also, I think this is one that I know I haven't explicitly discussed on this podcast, but this gives a great example of is I don't know where to start. There's so much that I want to know, so many questions that I have that I do not even know where to begin. It's almost like trying to find the starting point on a circle. Everywhere seems like an appropriate place to start. And when you just start asking the questions, you realize that you'll gather more information, and that information will lead your subsequent curiosity, but you need to start. But sometimes people say, I don't know where to start. And as a result, I simply will not start, and I won't ask the questions that I need to. But again, you just said, listen, there's a lot I want to know. I'm going to just pick a question and I'll start there. You don't need to overthink it. And I think that's what holds people back.
It does, because it could just be like a mental overload and you just shut down. Like you said, just pick a spot. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be the best spot. It doesn't have to be a spot they think is great. Just start. Yeah. Just start. I love that.
Yeah. And one of the things I've noticed too is that sometimes I ask a question and I get lucky and I say, oh yeah, this was a good place to start.
Yeah.
Sometimes I ask a question and then they give an answer. I was like, nah, that wasn't the right place to start. But you know what I find out? I figure out now this subsequent question will be a better place to start.
Right.
And so starting is always the answer to the question of where to start.
Yeah. I love that. Yep.
Oh, this is great. Yeah. So this certainly will not be your last time on. Of course, you have autonomy and you have choice. But if I
would love
anyway.
to. And my choice would be yes.
Thank you. This is great. This was really helpful. Before you go, any parting words of advice to the listeners before you head out?
No, that's my biggest thing. Be good listeners. Ask lots of questions. You'd be amazed what you get. People are desperate to be able to tell their story, to be able to talk and share. It's like air to them if you can listen. So if you can give that to your kids, to your colleagues, to whomever you're negotiating with, I just think it is the easiest place to start. I do find in some of the negotiation stuff, it's 1,000 techniques. Everyone uses a different acronym. Everybody calls it something different. We spin it into a different diagram. Everybody's checking, have you read this book and this book? And do you know this? It doesn't matter. This isn't rocket science. This is people. This is human beings. Just listen. Start with the benefit of the doubt. You can always, in our world, I'm always going to come in and give you the benefit of the doubt, assume you're a decent enough person, because sometimes I see people that aren't decent, but you have something and I'm going to find it. And if not, and you don't want to show it and it escalates, I can escalate. But if I come in too hot, I can never step down. So it's so much easier for me to come in with the benefit of the doubt, and then we'll see where this conversation goes. So I just think it doesn't have to be, like you said, you don't have to overthink it. This isn't hard.
Yes, I love this. Melissa, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Kwame, I love this. Thank you so much.